Number 29 on page 215 asks us to find all the zeros and write a linear factorization for the polynomial f of x equals x to the fourth plus x cubed plus 5x squared minus x minus 6. Now, even though this is a fourth degree polynomial, we're going to solve it the way we've done all the third degree ones. We're going to start by listing our p over q to find our possible rational zeros, and then we're going to use the factor theorem to find at least one zero, and then divide that out and go from there. So all the p factors come from your constant, which is 6. So we have plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, and plus or minus 6. Q comes from the leading coefficient, and in this case it's 1, so we just have plus or minus 1. So p over q is just going to be our p's because we'll be dividing them just by 1. So we have our list here. So the next thing we want to do then is to find a 0. And you're going to substitute those in. And when I substituted 1 in, I found that f of 1 gave me a 0. So I'm going to use synthetic division to take that 1 out. So I'm going to set it up here. I'm going to squeeze it in the bottom. So bring the 1 down. So I get 1. So this is a 2. This is 2. I get a 7. This is a 7. I get a 6. 6. And I get a 0, which is what I'd expect. Now, what I have is I have a cubic polynomial. I have my polynomial now looks like this. I'm going to have to find another 0. So I have my x minus 1, and now I have x cubed minus 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. And I'm going to use my possible rational zeros. I'm going to substitute them in that cubic polynomial. And what I found was that I get f of negative 1 equals 0. So now I'm going to do synthetic division with negative 1. So I get 1, 2, 7, and 6. And again, if you do this right, you'll get 0 for the last entry. And you can see that it is working out that way because I'll get my negative 6 and I get my 0. So now I have both of the factors I found, x minus 1 and x plus 1. And now I have a quadratic. I have x squared plus x plus 6. So the next step is to use the quadratic formula, because that won't factor. And I'm not going to do all the steps here. You guys can do that on your own. So my last two zeros are now going to be, let me write this down. So my zeros are x equals 1, x equals negative 1, and then I have my two quadratic zeros, which are negative 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 23 all over 2. So my final step is then to write the linear factorization. I apologize, it's getting crowded in here. Okay, so f of x is going to be my x minus 1, my x plus 1. Then I'm going to have x minus, and I just have to separate those two quadratics. So I have negative 1 minus I times the square root of 23 over 2. And then I'll have another one of those, and I'll have to write it down here because it won't fit. Then I have x minus negative 1 plus I times the square root of 23 over 2. And that's your linear factorization.